Lena Sesardic. I'm currently a product owner at a company called Invoice Wealth. We do wealth management, so sort of like fintech. I've been a product manager for about 4 years in my career. I went to university at UBC and studied economics. Straight after that, I decided to go into customer service at a startup that did English language testing for Canadian immigration. Very random, but I started my career right from the bottom of a startup just to see how a company grows from the bottom. And so I eventually got into operations there, where I was managing my own English test for admission into college and university. And then I had a big obsession with data analytics. And so I wanted to become a data analyst. In my quest to become a data analyst, I ended up becoming a business analyst, close enough, at a company called Broadridge in Vancouver. They're in fintech as well, just like Aviso is right now. There, I basically got my first taste in tech. So I learned everything about how to build software. We were a very tiny team within a huge organization, so kind of the same startup culture was present again. I learned a little bit of coding. I did a lot of building software with clients, wealth management companies and stuff like that. I then decided to do something a little bit different and went to work at a different company as a product manager as well, but this time I was running an innovation team where I was working on the discovery side of product management. So I'd done a lot of execution before, but this time it was all about finding new products to innovate, talking to customers, and bringing something into the market from scratch. So I did that for 6 months. I absolutely loved my job. Unfortunately, 6 months in, the leadership completely changed and they cut our team. And I chose that basically as an opportunity to go off on my entrepreneurial journey because I'd gotten that taste of entrepreneurship. So in February 2020, right before the global pandemic, I decided to take a break from corporate and go on an entrepreneurial journey where I did a variety of different things. I wanted to build a SaaS startup. Didn't work out, unfortunately. I tested a bunch of different ideas and then I went into freelancing in the end. And then just about 2 months ago, I decided to go back to corporate because I was super burnt out as an entrepreneur. And so now I'm back in corporate, feeling very at home and building more products in the finance industry. So that's a bit of me in a nutshell. I always wanted to start my own company. So when I first started working at the startup straight out of university, my goal was to learn how to build a company from the beginning so I could do it myself. But I never really had the skills. I didn't really know what it was. I didn't even know what you do with a new idea. Do you just build a company right away? Do you build a product? And so when I worked at the innovation team, I worked with an entrepreneur in residence and he was a serial entrepreneur. So that was the first time I actually learned how you do discovery, how you talk to customers, how you take an idea from a concept into something you can prototype and actually test in the market. So part of it that I gained those skills. So when I joined the innovation team, I actually planned to eventually leave to start my own company. So that was always in the plan. But I think when the leadership changed and my team was cut and everything changed, that basically brought my plans quicker than I had imagined. So that was kind of the extra push as well, but there was always sort of a plan to hopefully start my company one day in whatever way it is that people do it. I think for me, it's a little hard to even pinpoint skills in the corporate world. So it kind of depends what your job was. As a product manager, I learned how to build software. So in terms of the product development side, I was good. So those were skills that were directly transferable. I feel for entrepreneurs who don't have that product management experience because they don't really know how to build products. And that's a huge part of building at least a product-based company. So I think those skills are important if you're trying to build a product, primarily software, which was what I was trying to build. I think if you were in marketing, for example, in corporate, that would almost be potentially better, because one of the skills that I really lacked as an entrepreneur was marketing. I had no idea how to market something. I had no idea how to distribute it. I had no idea how to even really do stuff on social, or even websites. I had no idea how to build a really good website with, a funnel and everything. So I think it depends what job you did before, but the transferable skills I'd say are anything related to marketing, PR, something like that, because I think the biggest thing with a product is the distribution. But to be honest, the skills that were probably the hardest were kind of the emotional skills that you don't really build in corporate necessarily. So it's kind of the being able to pick yourself back up from a failure, being able to deal with the unknown every day. I think that was the most shocking thing about the entrepreneurial journey, just that daily doubt. And whenever you have a high, it just goes down so quickly, and just dealing with that psychology. So in a way, there isn't really anything transferable in terms of the environment that you're going to be in entrepreneurship from corporate, in my experience. The biggest challenge I experienced in the beginning was the ability to come up with ideas. So all my product ideas in the beginning were very typical first-time founder consumer products, or things that were in saturated markets like career development or idea validation, which is super saturated. I did a product in that space and it just did not work out. So my challenge was coming up with things that I thought would be able to be successful from a product perspective, which is ironic because towards the end, I developed that, what I call the idea tap, so much that the ideas were flooding almost at too high of a rate that they were becoming overwhelming, and I couldn't actually execute on anything anymore, partially because I was burning out, but there were too many ideas and not enough time to execute, and not enough energy to properly funnel those ideas through a criteria system to decide what to actually work on. The second biggest challenge was, I kind of touched on that earlier, was really the marketing side of it, and particularly messaging, and coming down to the actual tactical skills is copywriting. So I'm a writer, but copywriting is a totally different ballgame. You have to know how to write in a way that's going to persuade the person to buy something, explain something in a very specific way so that they understand what category the product is in. And I think that's where a lot of my product ideas fell down, because I wasn't able to articulate the value proposition of the product and really grab the attention of the right people. So this is kind of speaking to the marketing skills that I ended up polishing throughout my journey, but they were still not at the level that they should have been in order to really capture the right target customer for a product. I think the last challenge was just a lot of comparing with other people. So in the beginning, I used to really enjoy reading founder stories. I found them so motivating. I thought that there were so many opportunities, so many possibilities, and they were just a good thing for my energy. But halfway through, I actually stopped reading founder stories because I started to find them just depressing, frustrating. I was getting really bitter that I wasn't getting the success that I wanted. And I started really comparing myself. And that started to really exasperate itself when I went into the service business, because you're really having to put yourself out there on social media and drive those sales. And you see all these other consultants making a lot of money, and you don't really feel like they maybe should be, and you're better and all this stuff. And I think in the end, just that painful daily comparison of, oh, this person made this much money, this person made this product, I could have put that together. Why is this person getting so many retweets? I should be getting more engagement on LinkedIn or something. So that comparison really started to bother me, because I think the underlying narrative of entrepreneurship is just a massive highlight reel. And I don't think people are quite aware of how much failure there is, because people who fail don't tend to talk about it, but the people who are successful tend to talk about it. So I think those are the three biggest challenges. Some of the things that helped me deal with periods of feeling very low, or not feeling very confident, or feeling disappointed in the journey, or kind of losing hope type of thing, there's a few things, but the first thing is spending the time to actually help others. So halfway through my journey, I started mentoring at Entrepreneurship at UBC. It's an entrepreneurship organization at UBC, the university I attended. And there you basically just mentor founders as they go through the initial discovery process for their startups. And what that really helped me do was build confidence and remind myself that I had value to offer others. And even if I wasn't building my successful startup, maybe I can use my skills to build someone else up and see that satisfaction in someone else's work. So that really helped me. I also coached a lot of people on the side on LinkedIn, just kind of helping them figure out how to build their personal brand or any kind of challenges they had. Helping other people was a great way to just make myself feel better and make the most of the skills that I was building, or the effort I was putting in that wasn't necessarily equating to this SaaS startup that I wanted to build. I think the other thing that I did but didn't do enough of is just celebrating. When I did my first product idea, I actually, in the moment, I thought it was such a pathetic accomplishment, but looking back, it was actually pretty huge. So I managed to get my product, even though it wasn't even built yet, mentioned on a podcast that's actually a design podcast, and it has a pretty big distribution. But I just kind of discounted it because I thought, I didn't get revenue, or I didn't, these crazy goals. And I failed to celebrate that moment, because I think the biggest thing is you really have to, celebrate those happy moments and those accomplishments, because like I said, you're gonna go on the high and then you're gonna drop literally the next day. So you have to make the most of that. I didn't do that enough, but I think that's extremely important in entrepreneurship. The last thing is just taking time off. It's the hardest thing to do as an entrepreneur. I think we tend to burn ourselves out, and that's what I ended up burning myself out with the most, probably just working all the time. Because when you work all the time on your own stuff, you get to a point where you just can't stop thinking about it. And when I couldn't stop thinking about it, I started to feel more and more guilty when I wasn't working on it, or I wasn't driving the right results. And it was just constantly, I was unsatisfied because I was either burning out working because I'm not taking a break, or feeling guilty that I'm not doing something. So I think just taking the time is gonna replenish your energy and make you do better work. But I think in the moment you just think, if I just do this one thing, if I just do this one thing, but the truth is the list will never end. The work never ends, and you have to cut it off to give yourself a rest. The way it happened for me, so throughout my journey, the kind of 3 types of work that I did that really generated revenue properly was, initially I did a little bit of product management consulting, and that actually came from Broadridge, the previous company I'd worked at. So they kind of called me back for a contract to do some consulting. So with that, it's just really, building relationships and staying in touch with old employers. They can really help you out when you're in need. So I'm forever grateful for that. I left Broadridge with really positive terms and still kept in touch with all the people that I worked there with. So that's where that contract came from. So I think before you go out on your own, really foster those relationships, because you might need them when you're on your own. The second thing I did was freelance writing, which happened kind of randomly. So I decided to reach out to a couple LinkedIn connections. This was following an opportunity I had to abandon in April. So I actually joined a startup with equity. I was supposed to be groomed into the CEO for it. It was a marketplace product in the dental space. Unfortunately, we didn't agree on the company vision and the way to do the actual execution of the startup. So we ended up parting ways as founders. So after that, I was obviously pretty demotivated. So I reached out to some of my LinkedIn connections who I'd been keeping in touch with over LinkedIn, because I was posting content as well. And I just kind of jokingly said, hey, if anyone's looking for a freelance writer, I've written before, never been paid for my writing, but this is kind of the best that I can do. I just need some cash so I can keep going. And one of the guys I messaged, he actually said, hey, we're actually literally looking for a freelance writer, and I've seen your writing on LinkedIn. So if you're a freelance writer, write on LinkedIn or Twitter, because people can literally, or Medium, anywhere that has good distribution, so people can actually see your writing and you start appearing in the feed. So that was huge. And he said, hey, yeah, we'll hire you for a couple blog posts. The second freelance writing client also came from LinkedIn, because I'd been posting about product management, and I had actually changed my LinkedIn headline to product manager turned freelance writer. I did it completely randomly. I just did it just to do something with my headline that wasn't the previous role that I left. And she had actually been searching for product manager plus freelance writer. And the key there is really specialization and just focusing on a niche, because what I discovered later, and what I'm still discovering right now, is there's a lot of people who need writing for product management, but there's not enough people who know product management, because it can be really nebulous, and who want to write. So I kind of ended up hitting a niche. So I think niche down, but also use your network and post content and just make yourself visible. Because the thing is, people aren't necessarily gonna find the best freelancer, but they're gonna find the most visible one. I know people who are probably better at writing about product management than me, but I just happen to be a little more visible on LinkedIn, so people tend to contact me. The last one that happened was coaching for LinkedIn networking and marketing, so kind of building your personal brand. That also came about really randomly. So I'm a big believer in not cold calling or cold pitching to people. I prefer the opportunities to come to me, because I think then you know that truly you are the good person for it and they really, really need that service done. And so I ended up I was coaching kind of people just on the side for free on LinkedIn, just maybe creating content and giving tips here and there. And I noticed that one of the people I'd been coaching actually reached out to me and said, "Hey, can you actually coach me for money? These tips are good, but I want to actually have you dedicated to helping me." So I had a couple people reach out to me because I'd been giving some information for free basically and coaching them. And again, it was the visibility thing. They said, I see you, I like how you've grown, I like how you're genuinely very honest on LinkedIn. I feel like a lot of people who are personal brand coach or LinkedIn coaches, they don't really have that kind of genuine approach. Apparently this is what they said. So my general style of communicating and the way I was and my story is what they liked. So I think the more transparent you can be about who you are, what you're doing, how you do it, and if you can hit on that kind of personality, trait that some people might be looking for. Maybe some people want someone that's, not as transparent or maybe quieter or something, but these people liked me the way I was. So I think just the more you can project who you are, you're going to attract the right people who are going to get value from you. The way that I did it was I basically quit without any plans. So granted, my last job before I quit corporate and went into entrepreneurship, where I actually burnt out pretty badly because I worked way too much overtime, but all that overtime was actually paid. So I racked up a decent amount of savings to carry me through. But in terms of how I actually entered entrepreneurship, I didn't have any plan. I literally just went into it blind. I kind of treated it like a sabbatical. I would not recommend doing that. So I would say if you can, try to just start doing something on the side, because that way you can validate that what you're doing is actually going to be required by people who want to pay you. And you can actually refine how you deliver it. So usually you start a little broad, then you specialize, and then you really kind of hone in on what that exact value prop is that you can offer in terms of the service offering. It's a little hard to balance, obviously, a full-time job with something on the side, but I do think it's important to at least pick up a few clients. This is probably not advice that everyone is going to give, but I've seen a lot of people give this advice, especially in the freelancing world. There's the whole notion that, don't get paid what you're worth, don't get underpaid, and don't work for free and all that stuff. And there is some merit to it, but I think in the beginning where people struggle is they can't get in because that almost forms a barrier. It's like, oh, but my time is worth only $200 an hour. I'm not going to do anything under that. And it's okay to work a little under in the beginning just to gather those testimonials, make a name for yourself. Don't let some rigid idea of, this is absolutely how I need to be worth from the beginning get in the way of getting your feet wet. Because that way, as soon as you get your feet wet, you can raise your prices, you can ditch your clients that were too cheap before, and you're going to move upwards, right? So I think it's important to just get started, preferably when you're working full time. And then in terms of cash flow, I think the biggest challenge is when you're a freelancer, there's a lot of tools that you need to run your business. And there's also a lot of tiny tasks that you need to do that can get pretty daunting. So for example, even hiring a virtual assistant might be really expensive, right? So I think just really being very careful with where you spend your money or time, and just being aware of the 80-20 rule and not letting yourself spend, resources on 80% of the effort that's only going to lead to, not much of the overall effect, right? So I think that's super important, and just keeping yourself flexible to different types of work. I mean, I picked up some pretty random projects at some point. I think one of my friends called me up and he said, "Hey, we have to go find pilot testers for this new app that I built." It wasn't the best app, but I was like, okay, cool. I need cash, so just pay me this much money. I'll find you 20 pilot testers. I'll go walk around Kitsilano and talk to restaurants and see if they want to use your little software. and I got a little bit of cash. So I think just do what you need to do to stay afloat if you're not working anymore, and just try and slowly build that niche and that product, that service offering. Don't feel like you have to get there right away, because that's going to burn you out financially and emotionally. So I used invoicing software, obviously, to create professional invoices. So that was definitely one of them. Trello to get things organized. I used to also use airtable.com. It's kind of a better version of Google Sheets, in my opinion, to gather lists of resources that I had. And really the key there that I was doing is, as I gathered lists for myself, I actually ended up turning those into digital products. I actually have a product on my website called Pandora's Box, where it's just basically a 100-row Airtable of all the different websites, tools, I don't even know, lists, communities that I found over time. It's actually free, but it's just another thing that I put people in through the funnel. They get value from me, and then maybe they'll ask me for freelancing or something like that. But Airtable for collecting resources. What else did I use? I used scheduling apps quite a bit. I think Hootsuite was my favorite at one point, but social media scheduling apps to batch schedule a lot of content. I also used some online free resources because I was super cheap to write contracts. That was really important, just to make sure everything was knocked off from a legal perspective. I didn't really honestly use that many tools because I'm not the best with workflow. That was something that I wish I did better at. And I'm a bit of a minimalist. I tend to just kind of make things work with what I have, but there's a ton of really good free tools that you can use for your business, just to not drain the bank and actually make things more efficient. I think one of them I wish I would have used more is Zapier, just for automations, getting things moving quicker. I feel like I did a lot of manual work, and that's a whole other rabbit hole I could go down, but I didn't outsource enough. I just did everything myself because I thought it would be noble. But there's a lot of tooling and automation and potentially virtual assistants you can use just to make your life easier. You don't have to do it all. No one's gonna give you a medal for that. You're gonna give yourself a medal when you're mentally sane. Yeah, the viral tweet was definitely shocking. I was completely unaware for a long time. I've never been good at Twitter, so that was very shocking. But I think there's two things that maybe made it work. The first thing is that it's kind of a non-typical narrative. Usually everyone's, I quit my job, I quit my job, I quit my job. And I think people are tired of hearing that, especially people who are in corporate and have always been in corporate and don't necessarily want to go on that side. I think they kind of feel this guilt or maybe this inferiority that, if you stay in corporate, you're boring, you've never done the entrepreneur thing, which I don't think is true at all, especially now having come back to corporate. So that's the first thing. I think it was just narrative you don't usually hear. I think the second thing was that the tweet was pretty positive. So just the backstory of it is, I was really nervous to tell people. When I first signed the contract with Aviso, I was so happy. I was actually on vacation. I was so relieved that I was going to be coming back to a job, like no more grinding it out and worrying and living on LinkedIn and just feeling like a total failure. But I was really worried about what people were going to think. I dreaded the LinkedIn update. I dreaded the Twitter update. I dreaded talking to everyone and saying like, hey, I'm back in corporate now after doing all these 800 things. I didn't think people would even trust that I was going to stay in corporate. So I was actually really scared, but I kind of just decided to say it in a really positive way. I was like, okay, if I just spin it as a positive thing and I genuinely show people I'm happy about it, hopefully they'll just be happy for me. So I think that's what worked, that I just kind of said it in a the tweet particularly, I tweeted it really just nonchalantly. I didn't think anyone would care about my sad little life, but so it was really just a whatever tweet, but it was positive. And I think people generally on social media respond really well to anything that's positive, a celebration. So I think those two elements were part of the contribution to its shocking virality. Over the last, I think it was the last 6 months of my entrepreneurial journey, I had started applying for jobs here and there, and and some people had reached out to me about certain jobs and I'd had conversations, but I could never pull the trigger because I'd been so burned from kind of the last experience where I walked into something and it ended up being something totally different. Also, having been in entrepreneurship for so long, I wasn't sure whether corporate was the right answer. I was worried that I couldn't commit. So there was just a lot of worry from my end to committing to a job and then feeling stuck and thinking, oh, I should have just stayed on my own. But the way this opportunity panned out was the company is actually a company I worked at before, surprise. When I worked at Broadridge, they were actually my client when I was implementing software for them. So I knew a lot of people at the company already. I'd worked with a lot of them. I was, lucky enough to get a referral from someone who worked with me before. So the manager had reached out to me to see whether I wanted to return to corporate because he kind of heard good things about me and he thought the project would be really good for me. So that's kind of how it came about. But the reason that I ended up pulling the trigger on it was because I felt like I had information about the company, about the job. I really liked the manager that had interviewed me. I thought he was absolutely great. I also had a friend who worked there who I'd met on the last project, and so I knew she was really happy. So that made me feel more secure in the decision. But yeah, I guess the big thing kind of there that happened that was echoed before in my journey is just really maintaining those relationships and keeping in touch and keeping people updated, and that can really, really, again, save you when you really need it. I think the biggest advice, and maybe this is a little bit biased because right now I did burn out when I returned to corporate, but I've been chatting to a lot of entrepreneurs, especially recently, kind of following some of my recent posts on LinkedIn and Twitter. And a lot of them are reaching out to me and saying, hey, I can't tell whether I'm just tired from what I'm working on or whether I'm just unmotivated and I need to just push through it. And it's really difficult to tell, but I'd say just trust your gut and don't feel embarrassed if you decide that you need to return to corporate. Because what came out of my viral tweet actually was a lot of founder stories of people who had said, hey, I love hearing this tweet because I actually tried entrepreneurship for 5 years. I got really tired. I went back to corporate, but then 5 years later, I started more businesses and now I own 3. One of my wife, runs one of them. I run the other 2, and I'm an entrepreneur now. So I think the thing to normalize is just dipping in and out of entrepreneurship. And that's what I struggled with because I feel like there's a stigma that if you're an entrepreneur, you have to stay in it. And if you go back, you failed and you were just some joke or something. That's honestly how I felt. But I think we need to normalize and allow people to just take a break and come up for air. Like I hope to one day start this SaaS startup that I've been trying to start for God knows how long. I think we're allowed to give ourselves a break and go back into the corporate world, use those skills to better ourselves in the corporate, grow our career a little bit, regain that energy, and then go back out. So I'd say, it's harder said than done, but who cares what other people think? If you know what's right for you and you need to go back to a job for a bit, just do you. I'll support you. If I would return to entrepreneurship in the future, which I hope I do, what I would do differently is probably work on something on the side while I'm still working full time. And this is kind of the nice thing of having been an entrepreneur. I feel like now, even though I have a full-time job, I'm still freelance writing for a couple clients. I'm still creating content on LinkedIn. I'm still doing a couple engagements here and there. I feel like I'm better able to do multiple things at once. So the thing that I would do is honestly just start working on something on the side and then probably go full-time on it once it takes off. The other thing that I would do as well is focus on one problem space. The biggest contributor to my burnout during my entrepreneurial journey, especially when I was testing these different ideas, was I was skipping between different problem spaces. First, I was working in career development, then it was idea validation, then it was like an e-commerce marketplace. I was just all over the place and I couldn't compound the knowledge or the networking or the experience or anything like that. So I think sticking within a space and pivoting within it is definitely what I would do differently. And I think the last thing is just outsource not a copywriter, just outsource the copywriting, outsource the website development, just focus on the things that I'm good at and don't get distracted and burnt out trying to do everything on my own. My favorite quote that I usually use in interviews, it's probably so cliche or lame sounding, but a good leader knows when to step down. And this kind of speaks to maybe more of like my product manager background, where, you know, we're not really the CEO of the product, even though some people think we are, but we don't have all the answers. And even if you're a leader, you don't have to, and your job is really to pass the reins on to someone else when the time is right and recognize your own lack of knowledge at times. And I think that's important as an entrepreneur, just to be able to be humble and understand when, you know, you're not the best person for the job or the best person for the business or the best person in that moment. So that would be my favorite quote. So that's it. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm most active on LinkedIn, a little bit active on Twitter. I also have a website, lenasesardic.com. I love to write on there. I'm also starting a YouTube channel under my name, Lana Sesardic. Still growing, but I'd love your support.
Thank you. That was so good.
Yeah, I didn't
stumble